Okay, so if you're studying organizational psychology, you know that the idea of identity is absolutely central. But today, we're going to look at it from a really different angle, the psychodynamic perspective. And what this view suggests is that our sense of self isn't something we just find, like it's hiding somewhere. No, it's something we are constantly, and I mean necessarily, fabricating, building. To really get what that means, let's kick things off with a pretty big question.
So here it is. Why did a great ape paint the Sistine Chapel? I mean, think about it. This is the kind of question that really preoccupied thinkers like Freud, especially after Darwin came along and basically said, hey, we're animals, right? If we're just lumps of conscious flesh on a rock spinning through space, then how do you explain the Sistine Chapel? How do you account for all of our art, our culture, our biggest, grandest achievement?
Well, the psychoanalytic answer is pretty profound. It's to claim itself as human. All of it, our art, our science, our entire culture, you can see it all as the work that this great ape does to become something more, to become human. It's all one giant, incredibly complex and kind of beautiful project of identity work.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll kick off with the Freudian puzzle of identity itself. Then we'll look at the self in relationship. After that, we'll see how we craft our identity throughout our lives. Then we'll get practical and look at organizations and the unconscious, before wrapping it all up with this idea of identity as a vital fabrication. Let's get into it.
Okay, section 1, identity, the Freudian puzzle. We're unpacking Freud's surprising silence on identity and his focus on identification. And it really is a puzzle, isn't it? For someone who was so obsessed with what makes us who we are, Freud almost never used the word identity. Instead, his entire way of thinking is built on a similar but actually very different idea, identification.
And this is the key distinction you've got to grasp. Identification is a process. It's a verb. It's this dynamic, ongoing act of taking in bits and pieces of other people to build who we are. But identity, that's a noun. It sounds so finished, so stable, so solid. And honestly, psychoanalysis is really suspicious of that. From this perspective, a perfectly stable identity isn't a sign of health. It's seen as a defense mechanism, like a wall you've built to hide all the messy, conflicting, and interesting stuff that actually makes you you.
So that brings us right to the heart of this whole explainer. If identity isn't some fixed thing we just find, then what is it? Well, the idea here is to think of it as a fabrication. Now, hold on. That doesn't mean it's fake or a lie, not at all. Think of it more like fabrication in the sense of building something. It's this crucial, never-ending process of weaving together all our meanings and experiences and relationships into a story that helps us make sense of things, a story that holds us together. All right, section 2, the self in relationship. We're moving beyond Freud now into the interpersonal world of D.W. Winnicott. See, while Freud was really focused on the conflicts happening inside our heads, later thinkers like Winnicott made a huge shift. They started looking outward, and they argued that our sense of self isn't born in isolation. It's born from our relationships with other people. And this quote from Winnicott is maybe his most famous, and it's designed to stop you in your tracks. There is no such thing as an infant. What on earth does he mean by that? Well, his point is that you can't even conceive of an infant without also conceiving of the person caring for it. The self doesn't just pop into existence in a vacuum. It's always part of a dyad, part of a relationship. An infant on its own, well, it's not a viable concept.
So for a self to even begin to develop, it needs what Winnicott called a holding environment. And this isn't just about being physically held. It's a psychological space, a social context created by a caregiver that's safe enough for a true self to start peeking out. It's an environment that helps manage all those overwhelming feelings and anxieties and allows the infant to start making sense of its world.
And here's how it works, and it's just brilliant. It starts with the infant making some kind of spontaneous gesture, a sound, a movement, whatever. Now, the crucial part is what happens next. A good enough caregiver doesn't jump in and impose their own meaning on it. They just create a space for it. They reflect it back. And in that moment, the infant has this incredible realization. Hey, I did that. That was me. And that is the very beginning of agency. It's the birth of what Winnicott called the true self, this core feeling that who I am authentically is good and is loved. Okay, so we've established that the self gets its start in these super early relationships. But what happens after that? Does it just stop? Of course not. So for section 3, let's turn to Erik Erikson, who famously took these ideas and stretched them out across our entire lifespan. Erickson's big idea was that, especially during adolescence, we need something he called a psychosocial moratorium. It's basically an officially sanctioned timeout from adult life, a space to just experiment. And for many of you watching this, university is the perfect example, right? It's a place where you get to try on different roles, different ways of being, to figure out where you fit in society. It's a space designed for identity fabrication. But here's the really important point for us today. In the modern world, where your career path isn't set in stone and traditions aren't as rigid, this need for a moratorium, this need for a holding environment, it doesn't just stop when you graduate. Every time we change jobs, get a promotion, or face a big life transition, our identity gets called into question all over again. We basically need these kinds of supportive spaces throughout our entire professional lives. And that brings us perfectly to our fourth section, organizations and the unconscious. This is where we ask, how do all these deep psychological ideas actually show up in the workplace? How do the groups and companies we work for get inside our heads and literally shape who we become? One of the key concepts to understand here, coming out of the Tavistock Institute, is the idea of social defenses. And what this means is that groups create structures, norms, and routines, not just to be efficient and get the job done. They organize themselves, often unconsciously, to protect the members of the group from the anxiety that the work itself stirs up. There's this classic study by Isabel Menzies from 1960 that just illustrates this perfectly. She looked at a nursing unit. Now, the nurses there, they were dealing with incredible anxiety, right? Getting attached to patients who were very, very sick. So what did the hospital do? It created a system where nurses were rotated really quickly between patients, so they couldn't form those deep bonds. Now, on the surface, everyone complained about this system, but unconsciously, it was working as a powerful social defense, protecting them from unbearable distress. And in the process, it was teaching them, socializing them, into the professional identity of a clinically detached nurse. So this leads to a really critical idea. Organizations aren't just places we go to get a paycheck. They can actually become what we might call identity workspaces. By creating these social defenses and giving us a shared language and meaning, they act like massive institutional holding environments. They become the spaces where we craft, test out, and maintain our professional selves. Okay, let's pull all these threads together in our final section, identity as vital fabrication. So what is the big contribution here? What does this psychodynamic lens really give us when we're trying to understand identity in organizations? Well, it really boils down to 4 key ideas. First up, multiplicity. The idea that we aren't just one single unified thing. We're complex, we're plural, we're full of conflicting parts. Second, dynamism. Identity is always flowing, always changing. If it feels totally stable, that might actually be a sign of being stuck. Third, emotion. Feelings aren't just a result of who we are. A lot of the time, our feelings are what kickstart the whole project of figuring out who we are in the first place. And finally, vitality. The whole point isn't to build a finished identity and then be done. The goal is to create a sense of self that feels alive, that feels real, and that has room to grow. And I think this quote from Erickson just says it all. In the social jungle of human existence, there is no feeling of being alive without a sense of identity. This really gets at the stakes, doesn't it? This whole process isn't just some abstract academic idea. Building a sense of identity, it's fundamental to feeling alive. It's about psychological survival. So I'll leave you with a question to think about. When you look at your own professional life, what are the stories, what are the relationships, the daily routines that you weave together to make sense of who you are? In other words, what are the vital fabrications that hold your identity together? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.